Shocking escalation. Giorgia Meloni openly defies Brussels. Rome, Brussels, September 19, 2025. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has triggered a political shockwave across the European Union with a speech in Rimini. In sharp words, she declared the institutions in Brussels doomed to geopolitical irrelevance. Observers are calling it a turning point that puts Europe to a new test. Will the Union be reformed or continue to drift apart? A speech that made Europe take notice. It was August 27, 2025, when Meloni spoke to a hall full of supporters in Rimini. With a resolute voice, she painted a grim picture of the European Union. Europe does too much and does it poorly. If we continue like this, our continent will play no role in the major geopolitical confrontations of the 21st century. Her words resonated far beyond the hall. By the next morning, her speech was front-page news in Italian newspapers and the dominant topic in Brussels. Meloni made it clear, she is not calling for cosmetic changes, but a radical course correction. Europe must focus on its core tasks, competitiveness, security, energy independence, while also returning more sovereignty to member states. Meloni's criticism of Brussels. The Prime Minister identified several points of attack: overbearing bureaucracy. Brussels has become a bureaucratic monster, Meloni said. Decisions are made far from the citizens, without democratic proximity and without regard for national realities. Rigid budget rules. EU debt policy rules are, according to Meloni, detached from reality. Italy must be able to invest in infrastructure, defense, and digitalization. But Brussels binds countries to mathematical formulas that do not reflect people's lives. Weakness in foreign policy. While China, Russia, and the USA assert their interests, Europe loses influence. Meloni, we watch others set the rules, and we are not even at the table. Questionable personnel decisions. Meloni was particularly outraged by recent EU leadership appointments, especially the re-election of Ursula von der Leyen. Italy was bypassed. Brussels decides behind closed doors and sells it as European democracy, she said. Reactions in Europe. Between outrage and support, the speech triggered a political storm in Brussels. EU diplomats called it an unprecedented attack by a head of government on union institutions. Germany reacted cautiously, though Chancellor Olaf Scholz suggested that public attacks weaken European unity. French President Emmanuel Macron warned against a blockade policy and emphasized that Europe must stick together in a world of great powers. Hungary and Poland, however, publicly supported Meloni. Hungary's Viktor Orban praised her as a voice of reason against Brussels' arrogance. Within the European Union Commission, nervousness prevails. Behind the scenes, officials fear Meloni may embolden other skeptical governments to also take a harder stance against Brussels. Meloni's balancing act between confrontation and cooperation. As sharp as her words are, Meloni often shows pragmatism in practice. Italy relies heavily on EU funding, particularly from the Pandemic Recovery Fund. Without Brussels, billions of euros for digitalization and infrastructure would not be possible. Meloni therefore walks a fine line. She must show firmness to her voters, yet cannot close the door to Brussels without jeopardizing Italy's interests. Thus, in key votes in the EU Council, she has not always blocked decisions, sometimes abstaining. Observers speak of a strategy of pinpricks, loudly criticizing but acting tactically. Italy's domestic politics. Why Meloni sharpens her rhetoric. The speech in Rimini was also motivated by domestic politics. Meloni's party, Fratelli d'Italia, thrives on the image of sovereignty and the promise to restore Italy's weight in Europe. Polls show that a majority of Italians are critical of the EU. Many feel patronized, for example, by austerity measures or environmental regulations. Meloni's sharpness appeals to this discontent and secures her support at home. At the same time, important regional elections are coming in spring 2026. Political analysts see the attack on Brussels also as a campaign kickoff. Europe at a crossroads. The question following Meloni's speech, where is the EU headed? Scenario 1, reform and adjustment. Brussels recognizes the criticism as a warning signal and initiates reforms. Less bureaucracy, more safe for member states, more flexible financial rules. In this case, Meloni could ultimately be seen as the catalyst for necessary renewal. Scenario 2. Escalation and division. If Brussels remains stubborn, Meloni could escalate the conflict. Italy might form alliances with Hungary, Poland, or Slovakia and block key EU decisions. The risk, an EU rendered incapable of action. Scenario 3. Italy's isolation. If Meloni goes too far, Italy could become isolated. Diplomats already warn that countries that constantly oppose Brussels may eventually be sidelined. For Italy, which depends on EU funding, this would be dangerous. Danger or opportunity? Voices from society. In Italy, conservative newspapers celebrate Meloni as the people's advocate against Brussels bureaucracy. Liberal media, however, warn of a dangerous game with fire. In Brussels, there are also approving voices. An EU official, wishing to remain anonymous, said, "Meloni is right. We get lost in procedures and react too slowly to world events." Among Europe's citizens, opinion is divided. While many see the EU as a guarantor of peace and stability, skepticism grows. Is Brussels really capable of solving the major problems of our time? Historical parallels. The Italian special path. Italy is not the first country to rebel against Brussels. The UK's EU skepticism ultimately led to Brexit. While Meloni officially does not call for an exit, critics use her rhetoric to draw comparisons. Fact checks have repeatedly clarified. There is no talk of an Italy exit. But the very fact that speculation exists shows the explosive power of her statements. A dangerous game with high symbolism. Meloni's words are shocking not only as political criticism, but as a signal. Italy demands a new balance in the EU. Her opponents fear such attacks could hollow out the European project from within. Her supporters hope these provocations are precisely what is needed to force Brussels to rethink. Conclusion: Europe in shock. The Rimini speech marks a turning point. Never before has a major EU head of government so openly questioned the legitimacy of the institutions. Whether this is the start of a dangerous stress test or the impetus for overdue reform will become clear soon. One thing is certain: Meloni has shaken Brussels, and Europe will never be the same again. Outlook. Between hope and the abyss. The coming months will show whether Giorgia Meloni remains just a loud critic or can truly reshape Europe's architecture. What is certain, the cracks she exposed in Brussels are real. For the EU, this is a moment of truth. Either it demonstrates the ability to act and implements reforms, or risks that more member states follow Italy's example. Questioning European cohesion. For Italy, much is at stake. Meloni is playing high-stakes politics. If she succeeds in forcing concessions from Brussels, she could go down in history as the architect of a new EU order. If she fails, isolation, economic losses, and domestic political pressure loom. Europe holds its breath. For rarely has it been clearer. The future of the Union is not decided in quiet meetings in Brussels, but on the open stage, in a clash with a prime minister unafraid of bold words.